Hello YouTube! Welcome to my all-in-one guide video on Chiori, the newest 5-star Geo character in Genshin Impact, sporting a new and improved design over albedo. In this video, I'll be going through her talent set and how to play her, constellations and their impact on her gameplay, best choices for weapons and artifact setups, recommended stats to have, and the team synergies that she enables. Let's begin. Talents. So Chiori's core gameplay operates really closely to albedo with some extra features. Her elemental skill summons these dolls that provide consistent off-field geo DPS on set intervals. If there are any geo constructs already on the field, or if any are summoned while her doll is active, one additional doll will be generated with the same attack patterns and independent duration. While these dolls are active, they deal geo damage when summoned, and every 3.6 seconds over the course of a 17-second duration, totaling to 5 attacks. With her A4 passive as well, geo constructs that nearby party members generate grant Chiori 20% geo damage bonus for 20 seconds. This damage bonus benefits Chiori and her dolls immediately because her dolls are dynamic and don't snapshot buffs. For her A4 passive, this means you don't have to do a specific team rotation to set up geo constructs before Chiori sets up her dolls. The damage dealt by her skill's initial cast, upward swing, and her dolls are dual scaling on both attack and defense with slightly higher multipliers for the defense. And with her A1 passive, she allows an additional action after using her skill. Either 1. You can use her skill again and it automatically switches to your next party member and grants a coordinated attack buff, or 2 attacks that deals the same multiplier as her upward swing. 2. You can left click to initiate a normal attack and she'll gain geo infusion for her normal attacks for 5 seconds. This gives her the opportunity to be an on or off field DPS, but at Constellation 0, option 1, which is off field, will be used 99% of the time because the on-field geo infusion is significantly weaker and her normal attack talents are not dual scaling, they only scale from her attack. Additional notes for her skill: Chiori's skill generates 1 geo particle every 3.6 seconds when a doll hits an enemy. Multiple dolls do not generate more than 1 particle, so particle generation is capped at 5 geoparticles for the entirety of her skill's duration. With a duration of 17 seconds and a cooldown of 16 seconds, her dolls technically have 100% uptime. Using Hold E is just an aiming mode to target where she lands and places dolls. And finally, her dolls do not count as geo constructs. This is a blessing and a curse. So the design for this is likely so that her own dolls do not count towards her own skill's passive, where she generates another if there's a geo construct. Second, this means they don't get destroyed unnecessarily by boss hitboxes and other means, so you can expect to consistently receive geoparticles from Chiori and the damage to be consistent as well. Third, her dolls do not count towards geo constructs of other geo characters that are not herself. So there are some positives, some negatives, it is what it is. Elemental Burst. Chiori's twin blades leave their sheaths as Chiori slices with clean cuts of a master tailor, dealing AoE geo damage based on her attack and defense. This is a simple ability that just deals damage with a 50 energy cost and a 13.5 second cooldown. The ability itself has fairly average multipliers with no benefit associated with its cast, so it's not really a high priority uptime burst. And because it also has cast time and her dolls exist perfectly fine off field, in my opinion her burst is best used when you have downtime and your other abilities are on cooldown, or you need an emergency iframe. For her normal attack, it's nothing too special. Only functionally usable if you decide to geo infuse with her, but her talent multipliers are only attack scaling. C6 does provide defense scaling and makes her way more viable on field DPS, but of course, that requires C6. And because she's not a great user of the Favonius lineup, because her need for recharge is near none, this talent is mostly cosmetic. So, talent priority is fairly straightforward. Her E is her most important ability, followed by her burst and lastly her normal attack. All her talent levels just improve the damage output, there is no gameplay change at all. For those who C6 Chiori or just want to run on-field DPS Chiori with her Geo Infusion, should consider leveling her normal attack for her on-field playstyle. Otherwise, it can be left at level 1. Playstyle. So she's a pretty simple character, plays just like albedo with an extra input. When she's on field and ready to set up her dolls, press E twice, first to initiate her skill, and then second to immediately swap to your next party member. That's the typical off-field setup, with her burst being basically entirely optional. I think it's fine to use her burst when you have nothing else to do and are waiting for cooldowns. If she's on field, then the setup is pretty simple as well. Press E once, then spam left click to initiate Geo Infusion and whack your enemies. It's really as simple as that. The most common use of Chiori will be purely off-field, which is the first playstyle involving double tap E. Constellations. So if you are F2P or budget, you can honestly just go ahead and skip this part. Just being honest, Chiori's constellations are okay at best and don't do anything amazingly spectacular. C1. the AoE range of her dolls is increased by 50%, not the damage done. Additionally, if there's another Geo character that doesn't produce Geo constructs, C1 pretends like they do have a Geo construct. So Chiori will still get another doll and A4 passive 20% Geo damage bonus. This is useful for characters she's paired with that don't summon Geo constructs, namely Navia, Noelle, and Yunjin. If she's solo Geo, or paired with someone like Zhongli who already summons Geo constructs, the majority of C1 is useless, and only the AoE range boost is applied. C2. Chiori's Twin Blades summons an extra doll, not including the first two, that deals 170% of the original doll's damage up to 3 times. So basically, 510% of the original doll's damage once per skill activation. Her original doll normally attacks 5 times, which is 500% damage, so you're basically getting another doll's worth of damage that has slightly different attack patterns, but does the same amount. C3, C5. Skill and burst plus 3 levels. Skill is at C3, which is the most useful. C4. You basically get another C2 activation after either skill combo is finished. So either the double tap for the swap or a tap plus normal attack for a Geo infusion. This summons that Kinu doll again 3 times for more damage. C6. Her E cooldown is essentially decreased from 16 to 4 seconds, and her normal attack gains a defense scaling of 235%. So in this mode, she can Geo infuse permanently and is designed to be an on-field carry, because the Geo infusion lasts for 5 seconds from her passive, and her E cooldown in C6 is down to 4 seconds. C6 also retroactively buffs her C2 and C4, meaning when she attacks in C6, not only do her normal attacks deal much stronger damage, but she also has an army of dolls that constantly attack alongside her. So overall, C1 to C4 aim to give her dolls more copies and more uptime. C6 turns her into an on-field DPS puppeteer master. Weapons. So Chiori's got a pretty interesting selection of weapon options, and the biggest contributor to this is the fact that she's dual scaling. Dual scaling characters are kind of weird in the way you'd want to optimize their build. While it inherently incentivizes stacking both of the stats that they need, sometimes this is inefficient because weapons usually only benefit one. Take Chiori for example. Her skill and burst are attack and defense scaling. This means that only attack percent weapons and only defense percent weapons are half as effective, because you only benefit one half of the equation instead of the whole thing. This means that for dual scaling, you want to prioritize stats that benefit both. In our current game's design, we have crit damage and damage bonus, which both apply post multiplier and therefore benefit both sources of the scaling. A prime example of this phenomenon is Alhaitham. Alhaitham dual scales with attack percent and elemental mastery on his skill and burst. His end result build really prioritizes crit rate and crit damage because they amplify all parts of his kit, whereas sources of attack and EM individually only contribute to about half of his base multiplier. Alhaitham is also a really good example of this because he benefits heavily from the spread reaction, which also scales from his elemental mastery, and his A4 passive converts elemental mastery to damage bonus. So EM triple dips into his multipliers, passive talent, and elemental reaction. This means that crit rate crit damage on Alhaitham benefits 4 parts of his kit: his attack multiplier, EM multiplier, A4 passive damage bonus, and spread additive damage boost. And hence also why elemental mastery is much more favorable than attack percent when it comes to his artifact stats. Chiori and any other dual scaling DPS behaves the same way, just without the extra spread reaction. So Chiori optimally would like heavy stat sticks of crit rate and crit damage to benefit her entire kit. Some unique weapons that provide a large amount of defense are still able to compete because Chiori's defense scaling is higher than her attack scaling. So, welcome Albedo's old school favorite before the Cinnabar Spindle came out, the Harbinger of Dawn. As a primarily off-field DPS, Chiori's HP will in most cases be protected from residual damage and just needs to set up her dolls before switching off-field. Harbinger of Dawn's massive crit rate and crit damage bonus largely benefits Chiori's design, with the base attack not mattering at all. This doesn't mean that Cinnabar Spindle is out of the picture though. As a defense scaling weapon with a decent passive, it still performs exceptionally well in general situations. If Chiori is in a team where she doesn't get 2 dolls, like Navia or Noelle, Cinnabar's passive shines. In teams where she does have 2 dolls, they unfortunately do not attack simultaneously, so Cinnabar's passive will only affect 1 doll's attack. In this case, Harbinger of Dawn is a better choice. So besides these 2 most common options, we of course have her signature sword, granting 88 crit damage, defense bonus, and damage percent bonus. Any 5-star stat stick as well that grants crit rate or crit damage will be usable just for the crit stats. And as a last resort, if none of the above are available, are these 4-star weapons: Wolf Fang from the Battle Pass, and Finale of the Deep, which is forgeable. So personally, I would recommend you guys stick to her signature weapon, then Harbinger of Dawn and Cinnabar Spindle, and then an arbitrary 5-star stat stick. Artifacts. As a Geo character who deals most of her damage through her E, Chiori's most optimal choices surround these two. Golden Troop. This grants the largest source of skill-based damage, and she's mostly off-field, so it's a win-win. Not applicable for on-field Chiori. 4-piece Husk. This grants a generous amount of defense and geo damage bonus, whether she's on or off-field. If running on-field Chiori with Farina, which I think only C6 Chioris can really consider, maybe some C0 Chioris, 4-piece Marechaussee Hunter is also a DPS alternative. 4-piece Echoing Woods is generally not recommended because Chiori has no easy way of grabbing crystallized shards. For farming efficiency, Golden Troop is likely going to be an optimal option because it also farms for Marechaussee, which is the flavor of the region given most Fontaine characters standardize with it. And if you are supremely dedicated to Geo, of course, Husk is a best in slot farming choice for most Geo defense characters. Main stats. So nearly all Chioris will run the following setup: Defense Sands, Geo Goblet, and Crit Mask. An attack Sands is an alternative, but it will always be 25% weaker than a defense main stat because of two things. First, Chiori's scaling is more in favor of her defense, and second, defense main stat is 12% higher at 58.3% versus 46.6% for attack percent. Energy recharge Sands will never be used. Chiori's burst is very minor and completely optional part of her kit. For the Goblet, it's interchangeable with defense or attack percent if paired with Farina. For Mask, always crit. Scales the best for all of her stat needs. Recommended stats. So my Chiori is level 90 out of 90, but 80 out of 80 or 80 out of 90 is totally fine as well. Depends on how much you're willing to invest in her levels. She does gain base attack and defense per level, and her ascension stat is crit rate, which are all pretty nice. Talents, 161 is absolute minimum investment, 166 is probably expected. With her signature sword, Uraku, this is roughly what you can expect. Between 1.2 to 1.5k attack, 1.6 to 2000 defense, crit rate above 80%, which includes the crit rate ascension, and then crit damage above 200%. Recharge is unneeded, so 100% is normal. With Harbinger of Dawn, you can expect the differences in these stats. A drop to 1k plus attack due to base attack difference, a slight drop in defense to 1.5k plus. This is because Uraku gives 20% defense, which you'll lose, and then crit rate and crit damage, unironically, remain almost identical due to my substats. Expect the crit rate to be slightly higher than Uraku's build, because the total crit rate crit damage you gain from Harbinger of Dawn is greater than Uraku's. It's just that you have to maintain 90% HP. So the damage difference between these builds just comes from the drop in attack and defense from the weapon base stats, which is a really good example of how strong Harbinger of Dawn is if you maintain that HP threshold. If you decide to run Marechaussee, cap your crit rate at 64%, and your crit damage can probably hit 250 to 300%. Team comps. So the most generalized recommendation for Chiori teams is that she can essentially be used in any of the teams Albedo used to be in. Probably the most popular of these teams, especially when focusing on Geo characters, is the Mono Geo team comp revolving around either Ito or Noelle. This comp was originally composed of Ito plus Zhongli, Albedo, Goro, with the focus on a singular hypercarry and mostly defense scaling. Ito can be replaced with Noelle as a similar defense scaling hypercarry. In this team, Albedo would swap out for Chiori and essentially interact the same way, providing off-field DPS and consistent geoparticle generation. And you may be thinking, Zhongli is the only character here that doesn't scale with defense. So what about both Albedo and Chiori with Goro and the Geo DPS? As much as I'd love to be able to recommend that team, the biggest problem is that there's no dedicated shield provider. No shield provider means no easy way to reliably enable double Geo resonance, which is a huge part of Geo teams that provides additional damage bonus and crucially, reduced Geo res for enemies. So a team like Ito plus Chiori plus Albedo and Goro would need elemental enemies to crystallize against to gain shield for the resonance buff. Against specific enemies, it's totally doable, but it's not guaranteed all the time, especially against rotating Abyss enemies, so it's hard to generally recommend as a committed team. Setup rotation for Mono Geo doesn't really change. Chiori can set up her dolls whenever she wishes. With a 17-second duration, her uptime is pretty long, so she can lead the rotation if your other buffs are shorter. A general rule of thumb is longest to shortest duration while accounting for snapshotable abilities. Besides Mono Geo, we can also build around double Geo flex lineups. The two most popular setups for this are Navia plus Chiori and Zhongli plus Chiori. These two are functionally different, as one is DPS oriented and one is support oriented. In the Navia plus Chiori comp, Chiori exists to enable double geo resonance with guaranteed geo application and geoparticle generation with her dolls. She's a lot more effective than Albedo in this instance because you don't need to worry about geo constructs getting destroyed during setup. Paired with these two are stereotypical Navia supports. We have Farina plus Bennett, Xiangling plus Bennett, and Farina plus Xianyuan. All three are likely the most popular setups that benefit both Navia and Chiori, but anything that has consistent elemental application to generate crystallized shards will work perfectly fine. And since Chiori is dual scaling, the attack buffs from Bennett and double pyre resonance are still beneficial for her. Farina is always an excellent support choice, and her damage bonus buffs allow Chiori goblet flexibility to run defense or attack main stat instead of just geo damage bonus. In this team comp, setup rotations for Navia teams follow longest to shortest duration, with Bennett bursts last if possible to give the most buff time for Navia. Farina's buff is typically the longest, but her buff is way more important than Chiori's, so it's up to you which one you set up first. Next up, the Zhongli plus Chiori pairing. This is an upgrade from the Zhongli plus Albedo pairing and is pretty universal and can be used whenever a 2-character flex slot is needed. Since double geo doesn't react with literally any other element, its most optimal pairing is another 2-slot pairing that can function by themselves. This team comp is usually built around comfort and autopilot rather than perfect rotations, so these teams are usually far from the meta or optimal choices when it comes to DPS output. And finally, Chiori can effectively also be a solo standalone unit if your team needs a 4th slot to fill. It's not going to be an optimal choice, but for casual team comps, she's very low maintenance and doesn't require burst up time, so she's the perfect set up her dolls and switch off type of character. And that should cover a healthy amount of info to guide your Chiori and team to great success. I think that Chiori is a simplistic and a low maintenance character that adds a solid pillar to the Geo lineup. She can be used in both mono Geo and non-Geo lineups with a reliable efficiency and benefits from most buffs in the game due to her dual scaling of attack and defense. The fact that her dolls are not Geo constructs is both a positive and negative, because while it does give her kit consistency and reliability because they won't get destroyed, it also does not synergize with any other Geo unit that has constructs. So we'll see in the future how this will evolve. If you guys enjoyed the video and hopefully learned something, let the algorithm know by liking the video. I'd really appreciate it and it helps the video out a ton. As always, thank you guys for watching, good luck on your Chiori, and we'll see you next time. Take care.